So I woke up this morning and I just moved down to Silicon Valley and I thought to myself, I am so lucky. And I'm lucky, one, because I'm here today and I'm in a room with many of my good friends, folks that I've known for a couple decades. I'm lucky because it's another beautiful day, the sun is shining. And I'm lucky because all of us live at this unique intersection in time. An intersection of time where the American dream is still possible. And innovation is occurring at hyper speed. And we've all grown up in it. We're all product of the same generation. I can remember when I was a kid and just growing up and Microsoft came out with the first Windows. And they made business inefficiency all of a sudden a technology solution and made it efficient, right? And then a few years later, Google takes the inefficiency of the Dewey Decimal System and finding stuff, and boom, all of a sudden, Google search emerges, and they just change the world again. And then Facebook does it, and they use technology to make something like staying in touch with your friends, which I'm actually not very good at. Boom, as easy as just going onto a PC or now a mobile device. Or Twitter. They did it. Or LinkedIn, staying in touch with your business contacts. And so all around us, it seems like every couple of years, a new business is emerging and transforming the inefficiency of something that has long been just a horrible, horrible task. Except one place, and that's marketing. Because marketing is still inefficient. And despite all the technologies that are booming all around us, it's still a chore. And in fact, some of those technologies have made the very tasks in marketing more difficult. It's added more complexity onto the desk of the CMO. And why? My hypothesis is that there is a technology solution waiting to land in the marketing world and transform it. We're going to see it within the next few years, and it's got to solve three problems. And the first problem is this, that there's too much data, and the data lives in silos. And as I go talk to CMOs all over the place, they always say the same thing, which is, I got enough data. I just don't know what it all means. And the world around us is talking about, Google's going to own all the data, or Apple's going to own all the data. And it's not true. Data's a little bit like free trade, that if countries get together and trade goods and services, people are better off. But it doesn't happen nearly enough. And to support the point, I throw up this graph. And it's a graph I've shown before. It's probably, I first created an iteration of this 10 years ago. And you don't really need to know what it says. I'll tell you. It's a stair step. And what it shows is different data elements, the ROI versus a control group of untargeted impressions, right? And what it says is that if you use even a single piece of data, it generates significant lift to no data at all. The second box from the right has ROI lift in the thousands of %. And that's the advertiser's own data applied to a targeting situation. But it is always, always, always the case, bar none, that the best lift that you're ever going to get comes from a multivariate, multi-data segmentation approach. So, let's take Google. Google has great data, and every year they reach kind of an asymptote, get closer to the asymptote on search relevance. But give me any Google search and allow, that Google search to be adjusted for information about me versus information about my friend Dave Morgan here, even if we're typing in the same keywords, well, boom, I will make a better advertising decision as a result. And so it is always the case that if you bring together more data, you will make a better decision. And that's why all this talk recently in the industry about the cookie wars, it's meaningless. Because there's no way that Google's going to own all the data, or Apple's going to own all the data, or AT&T's going to own all the data. Each one of them is going to have important data sets. And by linking them together, only by linking them together, do you get to the far right, to the best possible outcome, to the best result from an advertising perspective. Second point on data is it's not just about the breadth of data. You have to break down the silos even within your organization. So in Walt Disney does this really well. One of the things they talk about is throughout Disney, someone historically has always owned the moment. But no one at Disney historically has owned the customer. And so as an advertiser, if you think about the implication of that, Well, you probably have some people who are working on acquisition marketing, and you have some people who are working on retention marketing, and maybe you're divided into things like email or digital or offline marketing, and none of that matters, because the best marketers in the world of the future are going to organize around the customer, and the tactic is going to be secondary. So instead of talking about CRM or DMPs, both of those are silos. And you don't get the best outcome unless you marry those together. DMPs and CRM, all of that information has to live together. And then the third piece about data silos, it's really important to think about going forward, and I've heard a couple speakers talk about this earlier, is there is a new type of data, and everyone should be collecting it, and it's called consumer permissions. Consumer permissions are like the patents in the legal world. They will be the currency with which folks in the industry buy and trade and sell in the future. Consumers are too smart about how valuable their data is. They want to have a conversation with brands, and in an industry that prides itself in making connections between businesses and the people they want to reach to bring them together to have better experiences, if we ignore the voice of the consumer, if we ignore their preferences, we can't possibly make a good match, right? And so you better start collecting those permissions and start thinking about your data, not in terms of, well, what are the other third-party data elements I can add? Start thinking about it from a United Airlines perspective, which is, if we pool some of our data together with Chase, bam, we can launch the United Chase Visa card using the best permission data from both companies and have a much better outcome. So data silos have to break down. It's all about connections between data. The second reason marketing doesn't work is this. Even all the data in the world doesn't mean anything if you can't translate it into insights, if you can't connect the dots and form a meaningful pattern. So let me share with you 3 ideas here. First off, put on my glasses here. Insights start with recognition. Here's some just crazy stats when you think about cookies or device IDs or those words that are bandied around in the industry. Cookies never bought anything. People buy things. And in fact, if you go to a personal level and you think about in a world of technology fragmentation, media fragmentation, the average user has 50 different device IDs and 70 different major cookies. So if you're trying to get to a user, you're going to start to look schizophrenic because you're getting, every time you interact with a cookie, you're getting just a fraction of what that person actually is. And so if you buy into the premise that you have to connect your silos of data, then the implication is that you absolutely have to resolve to a single view of every consumer. And so Rebecca at Gmail and Becky Jones Hall, who lives at Main Street, and R. Jones at corp.com and a mobile number all have to link back to a specific view of an individual, because you as a marketer needs to understand that what you need to do is create the world's largest spreadsheet, one that has a row for every user on the planet, and that every single observable piece of information in a privacy-compliant way, you can track back and populate it in the appropriate row. And if you can do that, then you have truly collected all the information there is to know about a consumer and make a much better decision and have a much better communication with that consumer. The second challenge here is that a lot of people will say, it's all about big data algorithms. They'll throw around things like Hadoop, and you got to bring in all kinds of smart people to start crunching your own models. And those folks are wrong. They're absolutely wrong. And to prove it, I'll just share a simple analogy of my kids and the Lego Corporation. You guys have Legos. They literally, I trip over them every morning. And they're the most wonderful things because Lego builds 1,000 different bricks, standard parts. But with those 1,000 different bricks, literally you can create almost anything imaginable by taking the standard pieces and creating something wonderful. And so as you start to think through data, there are two approaches. Here's the wrong approach. The wrong approach is, let's go gather everything in the world, let's hire some big data scientists, let's pour through it all at great expense, and then build some custom models. A much smarter approach is to say, I'm going to take some stuff, some off-the-shelf variables, some models like widely commercial models, who's ready to buy a car or who lives in a certain zip code, and then use those building blocks to create something that's really appropriate for the audience you're trying to reach. Literally, the difference in the two approaches is years of testing control versus literally days of getting off the ground, running with something that's good out of the gate, and then evolving off of that. All right. We don't need more data scientists. And for a decade, I've been saying something that's absolutely wrong. People, I sit in a panel discussion, they say, what does the industry need? And I said, well, agencies and technology companies, we need more graduates who are like PhDs in statistics to help us think through all of the big data models. And in fact, I think that is, in hindsight, absolutely wrong. Because for 10 years, I've been trying to hire these people, and there's not enough of them. It's just impossible. And even if you can hire them and you say, hey, go build me a big data model, and they go back and like a week later they come back and they tell you something, and it's an equation with numbers, and it's so painful because, great data scientists often can't speak great business. They can't simplify it and make it intuitive. And so what's needed, and kind of cry for the industry, is let's stop talking about hiring more data scientists and let's start making the technology as easy to use as a calculator on the desk. Let's take a page out of the Mark Benioff playbook in Dreamforce this week. What's the one thing he did really well? Well, he took CRM and he made it so intuitive and so simple that everybody in the organization could wrap their mind around what it was. And instead of just being the CRO needed to have it, all of a sudden the CEO needed to have it, and the CFO needed to have it for forecasting, and the chief product officer needed to have it to develop great product. And so on and so forth. And so from a technology perspective, we simply have to make things easier as opposed to just bringing in more smart people. And then the final piece that can be solved by technology is that even if you have great insights, ultimately those insights have to be translated into actions, right? As CEOs, CMOs, you're at the wheel of the car. You need to know where to turn. You need to be in control. But imagine if you got into the car and you programmed in your nav stuff in English, and then all of a sudden it started speaking back to you in the first turn in Russian, and the second turn in Spanish, and the roadsides were in Chinese. Pretty soon you drive right off the cliff. And that is in fact what's happening in marketing. Because even if I get to a great insight, I know this is exactly who I want to message with this particular call to action, by the time I actually traffic that in the industry, I have to use multiple different systems because the online publishers don't recognize the audience person I'm trying to reach except by an anonymous cookie. And the television doesn't recognize them except for maybe a GRP point. And so all of those different languages, whether it's Google speak or Facebook speak or television speak or direct mail speak, they need a common denominator. They need a common language, right? A business language. And what I will suggest to you is that the business language has to be data. And marketers need to be able to take data and create their own blueprint and traffic that out to the industry such that the industry can react to what the marketer wants as opposed to the marketer goes into 50 or 100 or 200 different buying systems and then has to make sense of it by some kludgy cross-media mix optimization analysis. Again, as fragmentation exists, we're making the problem harder as opposed to simpler. And finally, I will end on this. This is the Lumascape. If any of you have ever watched Terence Khawaja present this, it is every bit as unreadable on a big screen as it is as a part of a much smaller screen. And so two things can happen. Either the industry is going to consolidate, and thousands of companies will consolidate under the Google platform or the Facebook platform or the Apple platform or the Comcast platform or what have you. That is going to be hard. It is going to be painful. There are going to be lots of casualties, and there is going to be less innovation. Another alternative, and the alternative I believe we're going to see, is that connectivity is going to become far more important than consolidation. So just as data becomes the universal language which drives all businesses, so too someone needs to come in and wire the world such that everybody can consume the same data. And thereby, when a marketer has to choose, they don't need to choose just one platform. They can choose their best of breed partners, knowing that any one of those partners can have access to their data. So kind of a whirlwind of information. Here's what we've done, and I think others in the industry are following suit. We've launched something at Acxiom called the Audience Operating System. It attempts to answer the data layer challenge by creating APIs such that any data, anywhere, any type in the world, an advertiser or a partner can ingest and utilize and break down the data silos. On the audience operations layer, it attempts to take all of that data, resolve it to a single user, and make the manipulation of the data as easy as punching the digits of a calculator on your desk. And an applications layer that allows that data that's warehoused and ingested and turned into insights to be accessible by anyone on the planet. So whether it's the advertiser themselves, their agency, different partners in the technology stack, major publishers, all of them can access this and utilize it. We built the audience operating system not for Acxiom, but for the industry, because it is an industry problem that we're trying to solve, and we believe that if we can solve these three problems, our industry will absolutely take off. So thank you very much.